of you know that a year ago I decided to try a sport I've been interested in for a long time, and I took lessons on how to row crew. 8 people rowing a boat together, trying to get everything in perfect synchrony to make the boat fly through the water. It's a lot of fun, but as you might guess, since I was brand new to the sport and most of the other people in the boat were with me in the boat were also new, there was a lot of correction. There was a lot of coaching. Fortunately, we had a really good coach, and she could point out what we were doing right as well as what we were doing wrong. And when she pointed out corrections, things that we were doing wrong, it was very matter of fact. There was no berating, there was no attack. It was just, you're doing this, I need you to do this, try this adjustment. But even with positive, good coaching, it was really hard to go out evening after evening, Saturday after Saturday, and be corrected again and again and again, which is, of course, the nature of learning a new sport or a new skill or a new activity in life. But it's still really hard to be told, you're doing this wrong, you're doing this wrong, you're doing this wrong, change this. If that type of correction is hard to listen to in something as trivial, if you want to call it that, as an activity like rowing, how much more so in the rest of our life? The gospel passage today has Jesus saying, if a member of the church sins against you. That sounds a little distant, a member of the church. The original Greek uses the word adelphos, which means brother. It really means brother or sister, by the way the Greeks used it. So he's talking about if someone intimate to you sins against you, go and talk to them about it. Well, again, if hearing correction or giving correction is hard, even in a sport, how much more so when it's a member of your family? How much more so when it's a member of your marriage? How much more so when it's part of our national discourse about how we live as a nation? So Jesus is talking about one way of being, sort of being open to correction. But for centuries, humankind has tried to order its life together through a series of rules. And the psalm we read today, Psalm 119, or a portion of Psalm 19, talks to those rules or to God's law. Psalm 19 is a work of art. It's the longest psalm in the prayer book. And it is an extended poem that is a meditation on God's love and on how God keeps us safe by giving us guidance, by the glory of God's law, and how trustworthy rules can help give us a good life. So if you've never done it, sometime sit down and just read through all of Psalm 19, which is, as I said, this extended meditation on God's law. The truth be known, most of us hate laws. Most of us hate laws that restrict us in any way. I mean, how many of you drive 55 going up and down 2 and 4? How many of us wear masks every time we leave the house, even though we know it's good for us? How many of us are happy to pay all of our taxes and don't try to find any dodge that lets us avoid some of that? We're far more comfortable when the laws apply to the other guy, but most of us don't want the laws to apply to me. I think that's human nature. I think it's part of what it means to be original sin. But it's worse, I think, today than it ever has been, because of the way our modern culture elevates individualism to a point of idolatry. It's what I want. It's my desires that define my existence. Jesus, of course, had a better way. Jesus talks about life together in community. And Matthew 18, which is where today's gospel passage comes from, is this extended discourse on community, how to live in relationship, how to be a disciple. We've really been talking about this, how to live in relationship and how to be a disciple, all summer long. It's what the gospel readings started at back at the end of May and will continue all the way through November, this whole path of discipleship. But today we get a particular focus. And in today's focus, Jesus just sort of cuts through this Gordian knot of the law and offers us something that is, on one hand, far simpler, but on the other hand, the more we understand it, it's much harder. And that is, rather than rules and regulations, he gives us the rule of love. The passage we heard from Paul from Romans sums it up. The summary of the law that we say at the beginning of all of our Right One services says, love your neighbor as yourself. Paul goes on, for the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. And so today Jesus gives us some practical guidance on what it means to live in a loving community. And it means, among other things, it requires that we talk to each other and that we be honest, be really honest with each other. And here's the really hard part, that we listen to each other openly without being defensive about it. So Jesus suggests that we do this first privately, then with one or two others, and finally before the entire loving assembly. He uses the word church, but it's clear in the Greek that the context means the assembly, and the assembly is those who love the Lord. And it really has to be a loving assembly, a loving group, because, as we all know, it's really hard to listen to correction. It's really hard to listen to the other point of view, particularly without becoming defensive, without counterattacking, without coming back at the other person, but just to sit there and be open and listen and accept it. It requires trust, it requires openness, and it requires a willingness to admit that I might be at fault, that I might need to change, that I might need to grow. So most of us are, I think, a little bit more comfortable with being the person who does the correcting, the corrector. Most of us are less comfortable with the idea of being corrected. But either end of that conversation is really difficult. And it's something that we tend to just shy away from, even though Jesus tells us to do it. And I think at bottom, the reason so much of our national discourse these past few months has been so hard is because we've gotten this wrong. We have struggled with and often failed to listen to when brothers or sisters who have been wrong through history have wanted to complain, have wanted to tell us their point of view. And as a result, those who have tried to speak the truth in love these past few months have often been shouted down. And the process of a trusting, loving conversation has been subverted again and again by those with others' agendas of violence and political gain. And as a consequence, we're experiencing, I think something that's basically the opposite of what Jesus tells us to do today, which is this loving, trusting conversation back and forth, where we're open and we're honest and we're willing to hear the truth offered to us lovingly, and we're willing to speak the truth lovingly to others. But I think that each of us can be an influence for good and an influence for love, particularly in these important weeks ahead of us. Jesus has told us what he wants his kingdom to look like, how he wants us to live. And he doesn't leave us to do this alone. He doesn't leave us to do this on our own strength. He says, when 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, I am there among you. So Jesus has a plan for his kingdom, a plan for a better, happier church, and it requires us to trust in Jesus, to trust in his presence with us and among us. And because we trust that he is here with us, that he is there with us in the hard conversations, that we can then listen in love or speak the truth in love. Jesus has a plan for a better community, and it requires the same trust in Jesus' presence that enables us to listen in love and to speak the truth in love. And I think that's also Jesus' plan for a better, happier nation. Grant us, O Lord, so to trust in you with all our hearts. For as you always resist the proud who confide in their own strength, so you never forsake those who make their boast of your mercy.